The topic for today is going to be about motivation theory. Now, motivation plays a key role in understanding management, at least in its basic concepts. And what I will do for today is to do a little bit of overview on the theories and frameworks that have governed leaders and managers as regards employee motivation. And the reason why it's important that we want to know uh, motivation in light of management theory is that, well, management presupposes that we are managing people, correct? So we're not just only managing resources in general, we're managing people. And that's part of the work of management. And a crucial idea in understanding how to manage people is really appreciating the value of motivation and the role it plays when we manage people. So let's take a look at the various theories of motivation. Okay. Now, for this particular lecture or commentary, I'll be focusing on five general theories. These five are typically the more publicized or the more utilized theories. In fact, I've seen personally a lot of managers and leaders rely on one or two or three of these theories when they do certain decisions on how to mobilize people in doing what they'd like them to do. So there's Maslow's need hierarchy theory, there's Herzberg's two-factor theory, there's Vroom's expectancy theory, there's Adam's equity theory, and lastly, we'll talk about Skinner's reinforcement theory. Now, quite intriguingly, when we're dealing with motivation theories, most of these people, if not all of them, are actually psychologists. They're behavioral psychologists by training, and yet we're seeing the use of these theories in a very applied way for management. Definitely, there will be some variations, there will be some limitations from the core theory to the actual practice, but this is still a good start for us to understand the value and the role of motivation when it comes to managing people. Now, let's start with Maslow's need hierarchy theory. In Maslow's conception of motivation, there are five levels or five layers, okay, typically needs. So people are driven by needs, okay, and there is a hierarchy of needs. Okay? And as it can be seen by the slide, the most basic need would be the one at the bottom of the pyramid. And as you go higher and higher and higher, the needs start to become more sophisticated, a little bit more complex, and sometimes subject to a lot of debates, okay, uh, in terms of why they have to be at those levels. So the five needs can be categorized into three. So the bottommost layers, both of them, okay, would be characterized as basic needs. So this would be physiological needs and safety needs. So physiological needs, food, water, shelter, rest. Safety would imply security and general safety. Now you move higher, you have this group of needs called psychological needs. So the third level, the third layer would be belongingness and love needs. Okay, so relationships, dealing with friends, family, the social network, okay, that would fall under belongingness and love. Above that would be esteem needs, something a bit more personal, specific to you as an individual. Prestige, feeling of accomplishment, sense of pride. Okay, and these are part of psychological needs. Now, at the top of it, Abraham Maslow says that the most important need is self-actualization or self-fulfillment needs. So achieving one's full potential, okay, including creative activities. In a way, you can see that the lines, the boundaries between the layers can sometimes be blurred. For example, when we look at self-actualization and esteem needs, there could be some overlaps. But nevertheless, when we compare it with the more basic ones like food, if food or the need for food isn't fulfilled, then it doesn't matter whether we still have pending needs as regards self-actualization. So the whole idea of Maslow's need hierarchy theory is that you start with the bottommost layers first, you fulfill those layers first, the bottommost parts, and then you start moving up the pyramid. Okay. Now, if there's anything missing or deficient in the lower levels, it will be impossible for you to go up the higher levels. Now, what's the implication with management? The implication with management is that managers can try or cannot try to motivate their employees at the higher level if they don't have an understanding whether the lower levels are fulfilled. For example, you cannot motivate someone to be proud about themselves or about their accomplishments if they're hungry. Okay. So you can't say that, oh, you have to do this because if you do this, there's that feeling of accomplishment, there's a sense of pride that you've done it, while at the same time, that same person is in need financially, physically even, currently sick. Of course, the things that you've said about sense of accomplishment and pride, while they're all good, they won't really sink into the person. They won't motivate that person to do what you ask that person to do. Okay. Now, the thing there is that, okay, when the lower needs are fulfilled, then it's easier for you to actually appeal to the higher needs. Okay. Now, there's that danger of abusing Maslow's theory or the hierarchy of needs in this sense, because sometimes, and it does happen, that people have a perverted or an excessive appreciation of the lower needs. Like they can be so engrossed with the lower needs that they forget to really apply themselves on the higher needs. They just limit themselves to the basic needs. So as long as my basic needs are fulfilled, that's okay. I don't really care about relationships. I don't care about feeling good about myself. The thing there is that, at least according to Maslow's understanding, is that even if you are really obsessed with the lower needs, the higher needs will still feel themselves away. I mean, they will make themselves felt to that person, even if that person is sort of ignoring the higher needs. Okay? Nevertheless, the point of the hierarchy is that you cannot appeal to the higher needs without fulfilling the lower needs first. Now, the next theory that we're going to talk about is Herzberg's two-factor theory. Now, the two-factor theory, simply put, states that if you're doing a job, okay, there are a set of factors that helps in making the job appealing to you. There are a set of factors that would avoid making you feel dissatisfied about the jobs. Two sets of factors, that's why it's called two-factor theory. There are factors that helps in improving job satisfaction. There are factors that help minimize the dissatisfaction to that same job. Now, the factors that help in job satisfaction, you call those motivator factors. Okay. The factors that help minimize job dissatisfaction are called hygiene factors. Okay. You'll probably hear this in the future, whether something is a motivator or a hygiene factor. Okay. Now, what are examples of motivator factors? Achievement, recognition, responsibility, the work itself, personal growth, advancement. Something that you can probably compare with Maslow's theory earlier. And these examples are actually occupying the top level of the hierarchy of needs. Okay. Now, improving the motivator factors actually increases job satisfaction. Now, on the other hand, at the same time, hygiene factors, what are examples of hygiene factors? Working conditions, co-worker relations, rules, policies, your supervisor, the salary that you get. These are hygiene factors. Okay. Improving the hygiene factors does not make you feel more satisfied about the job. It just simply diminishes or decreases the dissatisfaction. That's why they're called hygiene, right? It's like taking a bath every day. You take a bath every day, Okay, there's not going to be a significant improvement if you keep on taking a bath, right? You're just taking a bath, you're clean, you avoid getting sick. That's the benefit of taking a bath every day. Okay, it's not going to make you elevate in stature, or it's not going to make you any richer, I suppose. That's going to make you any prestigious if you take a bath every day. So that's the idea of hygiene factors. If you stop doing the hygiene factors, then something bad will happen. If you keep on doing the hygiene factors, then you can be sure that nothing bad will happen. But will things be better? Not necessarily. Same idea with what's happening with the pandemic. A lot of the things that we're doing right now are hygiene factors, right? Wearing of masks, having physical distancing. They don't really help cure the virus, right? But they help minimize the probability that you'll get sick. So the things that we're doing right now with the pandemic, you can call them hygiene factors. So that's the idea behind Herzberg's two-factor theory. There are two sets of factors. One increases the motivation, the other one decreases the dissatisfaction. And the thing there is that you have to consider both at the same time. And if you combine it with the earlier theory of Abraham Maslow, you will realize that the motivator factors, they sort of belong to the upper levels of your pyramid, whereas your hygiene factors are at the bottom levels. So what does that mean? The danger for management on focusing on motivator factors without looking at hygiene factors, that can spell disaster. You're probably spending more time and energy and effort to push for motivator factors, but all of a sudden, nobody is really moving forward. Nobody is trying to elevate the status of your organization because the hygiene factors are not addressed. So that's the danger on trying to focus the motivator factors without looking at the hygiene factors. Now, the next theory is by Vroom, and this talks about expectancy theory. Okay, so when we talk about expectancy theory, this is also in relation to motivation, right? So when you try to motivate someone, if things go well, then you're going to expect something from that person. So that's the idea behind expectancy theory, right? Your level of expectations increase based on these three factors. Okay, and sometimes some books, some literature materials would present them as multiplicative factors. So it's like you multiply one with the other. No? So there are three factors here. So the first is expectancy, so the effort, and it answers the question: can I hit my targets if I work hard? Okay. Sometimes you look at expectancy as reasonableness or practicality. Okay. But okay, you can sum it up as expectancy. Now the next factor is instrumentality or performance. Will hitting my targets lead to rewards? So if I do this and I put so much effort in doing this, will I get something in return? Okay. And next is valence or the reward itself. Do I find the rewards desirable? Now, if these three factors are consistent or in tandem, then you can be sure that the person will actually do what's being expected of him. Okay. So, what would be an example wherein the result will not be a positive expectation? Well, for example, if we look at expectancy or effort, if the person is not properly trained or does not have the necessary skills to do the work, then no matter how reliable the rewards are, and no matter how desirable they are, if your effort will not yield the result that you want, then that person will not be motivated to do the work. Okay? So it doesn't matter if you have a very good rewards and recognition system. It doesn't matter if your company is credible in providing rewards. If you yourself, you don't have the innate ability, the skills, the talents, the training to do what is expected of you, then that person won't do it. Okay. If achieving something won't give you any rewards, okay, no matter how trained you are or how competent you are, And no matter how the rewards are reasonably desirable, if those rewards aren't given to you, then you wouldn't do it, right? And lastly, if the rewards that they'll give you are not pleasing rewards, that they don't really make you excited, then even if you're competent, that you can do the work that's expected of you, and it doesn't, even if the company will actually give you the rewards that they promised to give you, if the reward itself isn't really enticing or attractive, then you still wouldn't do the work. So these three factors are the in tandem factors that they have to like click in sync in order for that person to actually do something as expected of him or her. So that's the idea with Vroom's expectancy theory. Now, how does that relate to the earlier theories? Well, here in this case, there are two things that you are taking a look into. You're not looking at needs, unlike the first two frameworks here. You're looking at the ability of the person to perform and the immediate compensation from that performance. Now, whether that compensation actually addresses a lower need or higher need, that doesn't really give you an immediate answer. It would probably fall under valence. But even then, in Vroom's theory, it's a little bit broad, it's a little bit uh, not really confusing, but it's not accurate or it's not precise. Okay? It doesn't really give you a clear-cut way of determining the level of valence here. As long as the reward is desirable, okay. Whether it's desirable because it fulfills a lower need or higher need, well, Vroom is silent about that, at least in this overall architecture of his theory, or of the theory of Vroom. Okay. Now, the next framework for motivation is Adam's equity theory. So here, Adam looks at it from the point of view of a scale. Okay. So there are inputs, there are outputs. Okay. And the idea there, if that the inputs do not match with the outputs, then there's not going to be any motivation. Okay. The person will not be moved to actually do the work that is expected of him or her. So the inputs, what are examples of inputs? Things that you put into the job. Time, effort, ability, loyalty, everything in the mix. Those are considered inputs. Outputs, okay, the immediate results. Okay, pay, bonus, perks, satisfaction, benefits, all of that. They're considered outputs. Now the thing there is that if I clump up all of my inputs, whatever they are, and I try to estimate the outputs, all the possible outputs, and if I weigh them across one another, well, ideally they're supposed to be balanced. Okay. If you're putting too many inputs relative to the outputs, then you'll be thinking, well, why is it worth the effort at all? The output is not commensurate. Okay. And in this respect, people can become demotivated. They can shirk. Okay. Meaning of shirk is that they'll try to minimize some work. They'll reduce their workload. They'll reduce their inputs. They'll probably change some of their behaviors. They'll do what is known as enough, because the output that they foresee is not commensurate with the input that they're putting in. So the idea with the theory here is that at this point, you're not looking at hierarchy of needs, you're not looking at motivators or hygiene factors, right? It's a very simplified framework. Whatever input I put, if the corresponding output is not commensurate, then I would probably not do the work that's expected of me. Now, what about the reverse? What about if the input is less than the output? You can probably think of the company as being generous, for example. What would be the resulting motivation for that employee? Well, one is, okay, if that person is honestly motivated, then that person might put in more inputs. That might motivate the person to do more work. Okay, if he or she knows that the output is really, really so much more compared to the initial input that he or she was planning to do. So that's one possible effect. The person would really work harder. The person would be so motivated to do things, right? Or that person would just be satisfied with doing the input that he or she calculated at the start, but then he or she would be satisfied with whatever output that's going to be commensurate to that input. Okay, it's possible it could be less, maybe slightly more, but that's fine. The person won't feel bad about it. Okay. So that's the idea behind Adam's equity theory. All it cares about is if the inputs match the output. That's it. Okay. And of course, there's a lot of variations as to how fairness is perceived or calculated, right? So this is where the complications start to be a little bit confusing, because how would you know whether your inputs actually match with the outputs? You're not really talking about the same elements, right? Uh, so there's more debate around that, but at least from this framework, the simple idea is that the inputs put in should match with the outputs that's received. Okay. And the last theory, which is pretty much a behavioral theory, is that of Skinner's reinforcement theory. Okay. So the idea of reinforcement theory is that, okay, you have these four quadrants: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. Okay. So positive reinforcement means that positive behavior, if you're showing positive behavior, you will be given positive consequences. Okay. An example here would be the manager praises the employee for a good job. Negative reinforcement, positive behavior is followed by the removal of negative consequences. So in the example here, the manager stops nagging the employee, okay, because the manager has seen that this employee can do the work independently. So at least the employee can be given a little bit of freedom to do what he or she would want. Okay. So those are two levers when it comes to positive behavior. A positive behavior can be rewarded with something positive, or a positive behavior can yield to a removal of certain disadvantages or limitations. Okay. Now, what about punishment and extinction, the lower half in this figure? Well, punishment is negative behavior followed by negative consequences. So if you do something bad, then you will receive something bad. Okay, in this case, the manager demotes the employee for bad behavior. Now, extinction is negative behavior followed by the removal of the positive consequences. Okay. So here, it says here, the manager ignores the behavior. Another example would be, if you keep on doing the bad things, you will lose some of the privileges or benefits that you used to get. Right? Even in school, even in academics, you can see all these four levers at play, right? So if you really do a good job, of course, you'll be getting a high grade. Okay, but at the same time, if you do a really good job, if you study well, then in this case, you will probably not fail. Okay, or in the case, let's say if you need to do removals. So if you did your removal exam really well, then the removal of the negative consequence would be the removal of your failing grade. So that's negative reinforcement. Or what about punishment? If you did something bad, if you did a violation in the code of conduct, well, the negative consequence would mean that you might have to repeat the course. Okay? Or extinction. If you did something bad, if you did a violation, you will be, what's a positive consequence that's removed? Well, you could be expelled from the university. You lose the privilege of becoming a student. So that's extinction. Okay. Now, how does that play out in management? Well, when it comes to motivating people, the thing here is you're looking at it not from a needs perspective, but you look at it from a very pragmatic perspective. What is really consequential to the employee? And sometimes what's consequential to the employee can be what's proximate to the employee at that time versus remote consequences that are perhaps in the level of the higher needs, right? For example, what's an example of a remote consequence? A remote consequence, if I do my job well, I earn money, I get rewarded for it, I'm able to buy a house for myself. Okay, I can feel secure. and start a family there. Okay, that's a remote consequence. Okay, having a good life, okay, based on doing a good job. But the proximate consequence would be perhaps getting your salary, okay, or getting promoted. That's a more proximate consequence. So the idea with reinforcement theory is that it is more effective with the proximate consequences versus the remote consequences. Consequences or effects that are really far out, reinforcement theory tends to be a little bit limited, okay, or diminished in force. So that's something you want to look into. Now, overall, when we try to define motivation, okay, it's really about the inner force that drives individuals to accomplish personal and organizational goals. They have an objective in mind. Okay? What pushes them to actually do something to accomplish that objective, that is motivation. Okay? And there are many types of motivation. People are motivated for different reasons. Yet all of them, you clump them as motivation. So sometimes the more pragmatic and maybe lazy sense of motivation is that it doesn't matter what your motivation is. As long as you're motivated, then I would expect you to do the work that I expect you to do. But of course, I mean, from an ethical point of view, if you still recall a lot of your studies in ethics and morals, well, there's more to the motivation that we'd like to admit. Okay? Sometimes there could be good motivations, there could be bad motivations. For example, you try to do a good work because of some motivation that is remotely not good. Like you want to do this good work because you want to put down another employee or a colleague of yours. Okay, from an ethical moral standpoint, okay, that's not laudable. But as a motivation per se, that will move that person to do the job well. Okay, that's still motivation. But the source of the motivation isn't exactly noble. So that's the caveat when we think about motivations. Now, why do we need motivated employees? And this is the last slide here. Okay, in the perspective of the organization, well, we need motivated employees because, simply put, for the organization to survive, for the collective to survive. If nobody's going to do anything at all, then do you think things will make progress? Do you think things will push on? No, you'll be stuck, you'll be stagnant. And as we know from our own experience, if things are stagnant, then that's usually a breeding ground for negative things, even death. Right? Now, to be effective, managers need to understand what motivates employees within the context of the roles they perform. Of all the functions a manager performs, motivating employees is arguably the most complex. You know, as a manager myself for many years, okay, that is always a struggle. And the thing there is that even if you're managing the same employee, the motivation profile changes over time. Perhaps last month, this person could have been motivated through these sets of items, but this month it could be something else. And then maybe next month it will be a different thing altogether. So even when you're dealing with the same employee, the motivation mechanism also changes. Okay. And that's because human nature also changes over time. Okay? People grow, people learn. People are not machines that are static. They, they change over time, they grow over time. Hopefully they change for the better. But we shouldn't be naive to understand that people can also change for the worse. But people change. Of course, there are times that people don't change. Maybe that's good for the managers. At least there's more predictability on how to manage that employee. But in that sense, that's how managers motivate employees. It's never going to be static. It's always going to be a very dynamic picture.